Hi, this is Misha, and this is part 1 of a new series we're doing on Japanese small arms of World War I and World War II. In my hands is a Murata Type 22 rifle. The Murata was the first smokeless powder repeating rifle adopted and used in Imperial Japan. Obviously, its designer's name was Murata. I'm not even going to try to say the first name. Sorry, I don't know Japanese, and my speech butchers it worse than most people would even imagine. So we'll just go with this was developed by Murata. His first weapon was the Type 13, which was a single-shot 11mm black powder. It was followed by the product-improved Type 18, still at 11mm. And then the Type 22 came out in 1889, which was the 22nd year of the reign of the Meiji Emperor, which is how they were naming these. That was his year. And basically, before that, they were using the French chassepot in the 1870s, which they just purchased from Europe. This was kind of inspired by the Graz rifle and the Mauser 1871 and then 1871-84. So, quite a few influences, but it's still uniquely Japanese. Typical turned bolt gun. It has a magazine tube, like you might see in a Lebel or a Krapacek. Has a magazine feed cut off here. Push it down. Not sure if that might have been on or not. But yeah, it holds 8 rounds in this internal magazine. There we go. So 8 rounds under the barrel here in this tube, you can see leading out to here. This is also the bayonet mount where the ring goes. This is a 2-peat bolt design, but you actually remove this head. There's a screw. There's a screw. There's a screw right here. Unscrew it, then the head can come off and you can take your bolt out. Pretty typical for the era and the day. Typical trigger, kind of a small trigger guard, kind of a fancy, fine trigger. Has checkering on the stock. Now this one is missing the small upper handguard, which a lot of these are. If I find one day, I'll throw it on. They're just held on by clips. Other than that, it's complete. It has its original bolt head, has the mum on the receiver, even has the sectional cleaning rod in the buttstock here, which is kind of neat. There's a little trap door right here. But yeah, the Murata Type 22. These went into production in 1889, and they've stayed in production until 1899. So they were replaced by the Arisaka, which we'll get to briefly. In total, about 150,000 were produced. We don't know how many were the long rifle with the 29-inch barrel and how many were the carbine with the 19-inch barrel. It's hard to say. But this was in frontline service for quite a brief period of time. By the Russo-Japanese War in 1904, this was already in second-line service, and after that it was pretty much retired. It fired an 8x53 rimmed cartridge, which also was quickly phased out. Not many weapons were made for it. It's just a unique cartridge, one of the first smokeless powder cartridges in the world, and the first that Japan itself used. This is the long rifle. I also have over here the carbine version. At least this one does have its bolt head and everything too. Very similar action back here. Still has the same magazine feed cutoff here. Kind of an odd design. 19-inch barrel with a 5-shot internal tube here. Has no bayonet lug up front. Side-mounted sling swivels. Same type of trap door on the butt plate. But again, we don't know how many of these little carbines were built. With the total of rifle production at about 150,000, It's likely at about 15 to 20,000 at most were the carbine version, and these were in production from 1894 until 1899. They were used, of course, by mostly cavalry, horse-mounted soldiers in the day. There wasn't much mechanization going on in the late 19th century. But yeah, this is the short version of the Murata Type 22. Not a whole lot else to report. Again, very similar design to the long rifle. It's just shorter. But yeah, both of these were Japan's first smokeless powder rifles developed by Murata. And basically was a not, I don't want to say technological dead end. Obviously, there was a series before these, but between 1880 and 1890, Japan rapidly modernized, developed its own domestic small arms industry, and actually these weapons were quite well made, very nicely finished out. They're known for having high quality controls, so the end product was well done. I guess Japan wanted to make sure it could compete with Europe, wanted to be independent and also make the same kind of quality firearms that Europe could. And they succeeded. Obviously, it's a tube magazine fed. It's loaded by the single shot, just like a French 1886 Lebel, so there's limitations there. But it was reasonably accurate. It was reasonably reliable. A little on the expensive side to mass produce, but that was kind of the name of the game of the era. Alrighty. Well, we will move on. Alright, next up we have the original, the first Arisaka. This is the Type 30. Often nicknamed or called the hook safety for obvious reasons. Well, this firearm was designed by Colonel Nariaka Arisaka in the 1890s to replace the Murata. It was officially adopted in the 30th year of the Meiji Emperor, which was 1897. It fired a new, smaller diameter, 6.5 by 50 semi-rind cartridge. It was a round-nosed bullet initially. Later, these would be updated to fire a Spitzer cartridge. It uses a German G88 Gewehr 88 commission rifle, two-piece bolt where the head comes off. The bolt can be pulled out of the receiver as a complete unit by pressing this catch here, unlike the Murata, but then the head twists off at a 45-degree angle and you can take your extractor and your ejector out. It's actually a very complicated bolt, which eventually caused issues we'll get to later. It uses a Mauser 1893 staggered 5-shot internal box magazine. However, Arisaka did make one improvement to the magazine over the Mauser. He put a little catch here you can press to let the bottom out, which would dump the mag, a quick way to either disassemble for cleaning or to dump your mag and get everything out of it. This rifle version has a 31.5-inch or so barrel, standard unprotected blade front sight, ladder rear sight, which is adjustable, again pretty standard. As you can see, this does have a handguard. I wouldn't call it a short, but it's not a full length, so just a medium-sized handguard. Cleaning rod under the barrel. Interestingly, these cleaning rods were actually brass or bronze tipped. This took a new pattern of bayonet from the Murata. This took the Type 30 bayonet, blade bayonet, which actually would remain in service all the way through 1945. They kept the bayonet even as they changed the guns. Like I said, it has a hook safety here. Pull it back, that's cocked, and then you can also move it over, and that's safe. And then when you need to fire, just put it back. And I also like it because you can use it to decock the action without having to dry fire your gun. Yeah, this is the Type 30. It went into production around 1897 and remained in production until 1905. It was the front-line weapon that Japan used in the Russo-Japanese War. It wasn't without its issues, but it definitely was an improvement over the Murata. For these long rifles, they produced about 554,000 So pretty large number for being in production less than a decade. This rifle has a kind of an interesting story behind it. Oh, about 15 years ago when I was getting into Japanese guns, I had told the local pawn shop or gun shop that I was looking for an Arisaka, and I wanted to get one in 7.7 and one in 6.5. Well, I found one in 7.7, picked it up at a different shop in the same town. This other shop knew I'd been looking for one and called me saying that they found a 6.5. So I went over and I was expecting a Type 38. When I got there, I knew this was an Arisaka, but I didn't know a lot about the Type 30s. This was before the internet really became prevalent like it is today, so I didn't have a lot of info at my fingertips on the different models. And I nearly didn't buy it because I was looking for a 38. I didn't really know what a Type 30 was. But I went ahead and picked it up, and I'm sure glad I did because you just don't see many complete functional 38s anymore. 30s. So yeah, I was happy I picked up this Type 30. You know, it's a good early example. All of these are well worn. They were kind of retired from frontline service after the Russo-Japanese War. Some of them were still in service by World War I, but they were being phased out. Actually, several thousand were given to Japan's allies during that war, which were Britain and Russia. Britain issued many to the Royal Navy. Russia used some, and actually those that Russia had ended up, a lot of them got left in Finland in 1917 when the Finns declared their independence. So Finland actually ended up using quite a few Type 30s. Others made their way to China and other places in East Asia. So this is one of the first Japanese weapons that kind of got around the world a little bit. You know, became not famous, but at least seen outside of Japan, whereas the Murata was mostly just an internal Japanese. Well, that was the long rifle. Here we have the Type 30 carbine. Now, much like the Murata carbine, it's the same as the long rifle, except it has a 19-inch barrel. Takes the same Type 30 bayonet. Has a shorter rear sight, quite a bit shorter. Now, some of these have upper handguards, some never did. This one appears to have never had an upper handguard from the factory. That's not uncommon. Other than that, the bolt system, the hook safety is all the same. Now, it does have side-mounted sling swivels as to bottom, again like the Murata carbine. About 45,000 of these were manufactured, so about less than a tenth of the production was for carbines. Most were long rifles. Again, these stayed in service through the Russo-Japanese War, and then were retired out before and during World War I. Made their way around the world, and so on and so forth. One interesting thing I didn't show on the long rifle: these actually use a standard coil type spring in the box 5-round box magazine. We'll get to why that's a little unique here shortly. Yeah, this was the Type 30. The Type 30 was actually adopted by the Imperial Japanese Army. The Navy, however, did their own thing. Yeah, this was the first Arisaka, and it was developed by Colonel Arisaka. Pretty typical turn bolt gun of the day. Oh, and I didn't mention it, but this carbine here came to me through Doss White of fame. If you're in the Japanese collecting community, you know who he is. But yeah, very famous guy, nice guy, and he helped me get this carbine. It was actually out of his collection. So I'm appreciative of it because finding decent Type 30 carbines is kind of hard to do. Alrighty, we'll move on. Alright, next up we have the Type 35 Arisaka, one of the lesser known examples. As I said, the Army adopted the Type 30, however the Japanese Navy wanted a few improvements before it adopted something, and this is what ended up adopting Type 35. In 1897, Nambu, of pistol fame, one of Japan's most prolific small arms designers, Kaijiro Nambu, went to work at the Tokyo Arsenal. He worked on the final stages of the Type 30 and then started working on a team to help improve it, which came up with the Type 35. So Colonel Arisaka wasn't necessarily too involved with this one. By that point, he was kind of getting on in the years and close to retirement. The bolt system is very similar. It still uses a hook type safety, but it's much wider, as you can see. Much wider, much larger type safety. Now, what he did to make the Type 30 different, he instituted a manual sliding dust cover here, because in the Russo-Japanese War and before, Japanese soldiers already figured out that dust could get into the Type 30 action and clog things up. Another problem the Type 30 had was double feeding. So to try to remedy this, he went to an improved extractor, which was partially successful. The upper handguard is changed. It has this bulge here because it has a new pattern of rear sight, more modern style than what you squeeze and lift up. However, this rear sight would only appear on the Type 30, Type 35, and never again. It's kind of a delicate rear sight compared to basic ladder. Still takes the Type 30 bayonet. Still has an unprotected front sight. Takes a similar cleaning rod, or the same really, I suppose. Still has a 31-inch barrel. They only manufactured this as a rifle, never as a carbine. The Navy seems to have preferred rifles, just in general. This also was one of the first to have the plum-shaped bolt handle, which would be carried over very soon to the Type 38. But yeah, these went into production in 1902 and were adopted by the Navy. They remained in production until 1904 with about 10,000 manufactured, and all basically went to the Navy. They didn't stay in frontline service for very long. They were kind of phased out in favor of more modern designs. So by World War I, most were either put into storage or retired as trainers, given away, lost, sawdust, so on and so forth. Today, finding a Type 35 is quite difficult. And finding one that's matching is literally impossible. I know of exactly one matching serial number Type 35 in the USA. But yeah, I just thought we'd share this kind of offshoot. It's an interim step between the Type 30 and the Type 38. And the sliding dust cover might look familiar to a few of you because it was also used on the Japanese-produced Siamese Mauser. But definitely an interesting gun. Well, we'll move on. Alright, and next we have one of the most famous Japanese rifles, or really firearms of all time. This is the Arisaka Type 38, and this is the long rifle variant, quite obviously. Well, we just talked about the 30 and the 35. As early as 1898, there was already work began to replace the Type 30. Of course, part of that showed up in the Type 35, and then work continued apiece. And then in 1905, both the Army and the Navy adopted the Type 38, adopted in the 38th year of the reign of the Meiji Emperor. This was the first one that the team was led by Kaijiro Nambu. Before he had worked on Arisakas, but this is the first one he really he took the lead on. So this has a lot to do with him, and he did quite a few changes. The biggest is the bolt. I know you can't see it because it has this dust cover, but this bolt went from being a two-piece design on the Type 30 and 35 to a single piece inspired by the 1893 Mauser. However, it was greatly simplified and more elegant, whereas the Mauser bolt had 10 pieces in it. This thing only has 6, so nearly half as many pieces. And also, as you just saw, it has this sliding dust cover that's automatic, and it covers the whole action. The 5-round internal mag now has a leaf spring, which is has more rigidity, more longer life, just easier to manufacture. So it's just an improved magazine spring in here. Still comes out the same as on yellow. The trigger was also improved. The extractor no longer rotates and actually solved the double feed issue. The safety is of this new style, which is checkered, large checkered. It rotates a few degrees for safe and fire. Quite easy to use. Have a full-length ladder sight here. Got a handguard about the same size as on the Type 30. Still the same unprotected front blade sight. Cleaning rod's a little bit different now. The tip has changed. Still takes the Type 30 bayonet, which they really liked. 31-inch barrel on this critter. But yeah, the Type 38 was in production from 1905 until around 1942. No one knows exactly when they quit making these, but it was into World War II. And yeah, definitely a major product improved, more elegant, simpler, more reliable. And it also fired a new version of the 6.5 by 50 semi-rimmed cartridge. This was the first gun purpose-built to fire at Spitzer loading, a pointed bullet. The older Type 30s were reworked to fire it as well, at least some of them. But yeah, this is the Type 38 long rifle, and saw a lot of combat in World War II. It also was standard issue for World War I and saw quite a bit of use in the Chinese War, the Second Sino War in the 1930s. Along with the Type 30, several thousand of these were also given to Britain and Russia, Japan's allies. So you'll see some of these end up in Finland and elsewhere. So they got around. This was the first Arisaka, first Japanese gun to really be well known and recognized in the West. And they definitely produced these in much larger numbers. Well, this is the long rifle. And to go with the long rifle, I think you know the routine now, but that Japan did. There was a short carbine. Same drill as before. We have a 19-inch barrel. We have side-mounted sling swivels. And pretty much everything else is the same. Same sliding dust cover, same internal magazine. This is a later production one, so it actually has a protected front sight with these ears on it. And it has a smaller tang on the safety, or whatever you'd like to call it. Other than that, same critter. The Type 38 carbine was adopted and introduced at the same time as the rifle. And they were manufactured concurrently through World War I and World War II. No one knows exactly how many were produced, but estimates are roughly at about 3,400,000 Type 38s total. So definitely a much larger number than previous Japanese rifles. This cartridge was very good at anti-personnel. 6.5, it was very flat shooting. Gave off very little smoke, very little recoil. Very good at anti-personnel type rolls. These little 38 carbines are very handy, very solid feeling, quite short. Very neat little guns, honestly. Alright, Japanese Type 38. We'll move on. And next we have the Type 44 Arisaka. This was often a cavalry carbine. It's actually a highly modified version of the Type 38 carbine you just looked at. Obviously intended for horseback. So basically the same gun, same 19-inch barrel, and the biggest difference being this folding spiker bayonet. This whole assembly here they've got. This is a first variant, or Type 1, or whatever you want to call it. where the screws are quite close together. There would also be a second variant and a third variant where they kept making this whole assembly larger and larger, wrapping more and more around, basically giving more and more strength to the bayonet assembly. But the Type 1, the first variant, is the most common, and this is what was in production from the beginning up until at least the 1930s. Still has the same short rear sights as the carbine. Same dust cover, exact same bolt, side-mounted sling swivels. On the back here, now the front sling swivel is a little bit different. As you can see, it's a little larger and it's kind of angled for strapping across the back. There's not a place for a cleaning rod up front, so there's actually a storage compartment in the buttstock here that holds a sectional cleaning rod, and to open it up there's a latch right here. You just rotate it with the rim of a bullet tip. A lot of people wonder what this hook is for up here, thinking it's maybe a stacking rod. I'm sure it could be used as that, but I've also heard it was meant to be a cross guard for bayonet fighting to kind of replicate the Type 30 bayonet style of the day, which had a hooked quillion. So I've read that it was actually to trap other bayonets like a quillion would be used. Who knows? Interesting either way. Neat bayonet assembly, very thick and rugged. This carbine was adopted in 1911, which was the 44th and the final year of the reign of the Meiji Emperor. And between that time and around 1942, give or take, about 91,000 of these were produced. So quite a large production number. They were issued to soldiers on horseback and later mechanized. Quite a few of these were issued in China during the 30s. And as those soldiers were rotated to fight U.S. soldiers in the Pacific in the 40s, they would bring their Type 44s with them. So you would see these being used on the Pacific Islands and in jungle environments, where they proved to be quite well suited. They worked well in the jungles. Their short size and bayonet were an asset, and they were well liked, and they were also pretty popular with returning soldiers as war trophies because of their unique look. And it is a really unique and neat firearm. It really is. But yeah, this is the Japanese Type 44 Arisaka carbine. Well, the final major variant in the 38 family is this over here. This is the Type 38 short rifle, sometimes called the cavalry rifle. And what this is a standard 38 long rifle that had a 31-inch barrel that's been cut down to have a 25-inch barrel, making it a short rifle. A very small number of these are actually cut down to 24 inches too instead of 25, and I have no idea why the discrepancy in the inch length. But yeah, these were cut down by various Japanese arsenals in the 1920s and 30s, making them into handier little guns, and honestly, Forerunner, which would come later with the Type 99 short rifle, kind of a proof of concept of this intermediate length. An easy way to tell these from a standard carbine in photos would be that the sling swivels are still on the bottom because they're from the rifle, whereas your carbines are going to have them side mounted. But yeah, aside from the cleaning rod and the barrel being cut down about 6 inches, it's the same as the Type 38 rifle. These are pretty uncommon, pretty rare. You don't see many 38 short rifles. And they definitely saw service in World War II. Nice trigger on this one. But yeah, this particular one I actually obtained from a friend when he was liquidating his collection, so I'm kind of obliged to him for that. His name was John, so I appreciated him selling me this 38 short, because I've been kind of always wanting one, because it's an interesting interim step between the 38 and the 99. But yeah, this still fires the 6.5 by 50 semi-rimmed cartridge, and it's kind of the last of the old style Arisakas. Notice it has the protected front sight, has a peep instead of a notch rear. All the earlier ones had notches. And it has the actually concave notched safety. So it's definitely has late Type 38 features. Still has the removable floor plate with the leaf spring in it. But yeah, this basically concludes part 1 of our little series here on the early Japanese Arisakas. This is Misha. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below, and we'll do our best to get to them in a timely manner. And we really appreciate you watching, and thanks for tuning in.